guys, welcome back. Joseph Balmer here, and we're back out in the garage again tonight. Back to work on the Valkyrie, and I'm going to show you real quick when people talk about the nut cage mod on a Honda Valkyrie, exactly what that is and what that entails. So, do me a favor, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends. When it's all over with, please give it a good rating, and once you've subscribed, make sure you hit the notification bell. That way you get notifications on all my upcoming videos. Now, when people are talking about the nut cage modification, the time that generally comes into play is if you're running a Darkside tire on the back of the bike like I am. Reason being, this tire is substantially wider than the factory motorcycle tire, and this is a 195. This is a 195 75/16. Now, excuse me. If you look inside the fender, you can see that's where your fender strut and your fender bolt come through. That's the front bolt, that's the rear bolt. Now, you can see there's a bolt head stuck out here. Normally, the bolt would thread in from the outside. The problem that I'm running into on this bike is that, unfortunately, someone decided to jam some standard thread bolt or some SAE bolts in metric holes, and that doesn't work well. And unfortunately, for the last couple years, I've had to deal with issues with the bag mounts vibrating loose because the threads were all jacked up. So, what I'm going to do to change that up, when I do on the front, on all these bolts, I'm going to run the bolts from the inside to the outside, and then I'm going to put the nuts on the outside. Long story, I'll explain here in a minute. But the nut cage modification, this is the lower section of the rear fender. So this attaches up here to the front bolt, and it's what drops down in the back. Now, that is the cage nut and the nut cage. So, just hold the light here. This outer section is what's called the nut cage. The actual nut itself is the cage nut. Okay? The issue you run into with a Darkside tire, you can see how that's shiny on the outside. That's because the tire has actually been rubbing as the suspension compresses on the outside of that nut cage. Now, if you look at the other side, this one, the cage nut or nut cage modification has already been done, where you cut the cage off, you get rid of the nut. Now, I actually did, up until this go around, have the nut in there. You just have to reach in there with a pair of pliers and hold the nut while you tighten the bolt. What we're going to do this time is we're going to run the bolt from the inside out with a fender washer. But I need to remove the cage on this side. So, there's a couple ways you can do this. The safest way for your paint is to try and work the actual nut itself out and then cut it off with a hacksaw, because you're not going to generate any heat with a hacksaw. You just need to make sure that you hold it in a manner that, oh heaven's sakes, you're not going to scratch up the fender. I'm going to use my grinder with a wafer wheel, and I'm just going to have to go really slow because I don't want to generate any heat. So as I'm cutting on this, just a little bit, and then take a break, let it cool down. Ooh, hello, spider. I don't know what kind of spider you are. You don't look very friendly. Alright. Okay, now that I've cut through one side, I should be able to very gently take a pair of pliers. I just need to watch that I don't bend the fender, but a little bit of flexing, and that should break it at the other weld. Should being the key word here. And there you have it. That one's removed. Now, that's what your cage nut looks like. Just a square nut, sits up in that cage. All right. Now, what I'm doing with the bag mounts, step one, I'll get you where you can see here. All right, we'll set you up over here. Son of a... Now, what I'm going to do with the bag mounts, in order to get the fender back on, the first thing I want to do before I even think about putting that fender in, because once I get that fender in, it's going to get real difficult. I want to get my front bolts in and get them fairly tightened up. So I've already got this side on. I need to grab the bag mount for the other side. The bolts that I'm using for this, and I know some of you are going to scream blasphemy here, so I'll live with that, are stainless. The fronts are 5/16 18 by 5. Now, I'm going to cut these down. I can't leave 5 inches stuck out. But the reason I got 5s, because I couldn't find anything in the range of 3.5 to 4. The bolts I'm using for this, and I know you guys are going to scream, some of you blasphemy. The front bolts are a 5/16 by 5, and they're stainless bolts, stainless washers. I'm using stainless nylon locking nuts. Now, they're 5 inches because I could not find a 4 or a 4.5, especially not in full thread. And I'm using 5/16 because the original bolts were 10 mil. 5/16 is about the largest size I can get that will fit through that hole. And what I'm going to do is, I've already done here, run it through. We're going to tighten it up, and then I'm going to cut it off flush with the nut. And that way, anytime I remove it, even when it's installed, it won't interfere with the saddlebag. When it's removed, you know, it's not a big deal if I need to take the bags off. And then on the inside, I won't have the end of the bolt sticking through the inside of the fender that might catch this tire. If it was a motorcycle tire, I wouldn't even worry about it, but since it is a car tire, it's wider. I'm worried about the end of the bolt catching the sidewall of the tire and cutting it. I don't want that to happen. So, at least with the bolt head, even though they do have some sharp corners on them, the sidewall of the tire catches it. It's not going to cut it on that. It may rub it, but it's not going to cut it. We're going to have to reach in over top of the tire, find the hole. There you go. There it is. Now my tire is actually in the way right now. So if I get my shoulder back here under my tour pack and raise up, oh heavens. Okay, now that's all the way in. Now that I've got the bolt through from the inside, we're going to take our bag mount. Oh crap. We're going to put our spacer on, then our bag mount. Then we're going to take our washer and our nylon locking nut. And I can go about that far before it stops, so we got some work to do. Now that that one's tight, we can tighten up the front on the other side. Okay. Whew. After all that work, those are good and tight. Give me a second. I'm going to show you what we're doing right back here. Got the front two down. Back here in the back, first thing I need to do is make sure I plug in my plug for my tail lights as I put the fender up here, which can be easier said than done. Once I get it in the general vicinity, I try and get the top nut started enough to hold it while I figure out where to set the bolt down I lost. Slide the bolt up on the inside. There again, easier said than done. You gotta watch for the sharp edges where you cut the cage off of that nut. There we go. Just gotta find the right spot. Alright. I need my spacer. And a washer and a nut. With this one, I'm going to go with a wrench on the inside. Three and a half inches on the back, that's about perfect. We just have a little protrusion, but that shouldn't affect the saddlebag at all. Now, we'll go to the other side and get that one in. Same deal over here. What we're going to do with this one, there we go. We'll stick it in here about like this. So we got a box in here to protect our paint, and cut it off, and then dress up the end just a little bit. Alright. Now I'll give you a shot up inside the rear fender, and hopefully you can see up there what it looks like with just the head of the bolt and the washer on the inside on both sides. Now a little farther up there, that's going to be real close to the tire when the suspension compresses, but I think we'll be okay. But guys, that is the general idea behind the nut cage modification. Most people that do that are just going to take the cage, that square nut, slide it back up in there, run the bolt into it. I just took it a step further and ran the bolts from the inside out. You can do that if you like, but do me a favor, if you've enjoyed this video, if it's helped you out at all, please rate it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hit the notification bell, share this with your friends please, and don't be afraid to get out there and get your hands dirty guys. You might have a little fun doing it. We'll see you on the next one. Stay tuned.